watch the news and see people in different parts of the country suffering from extreme weather events time and time and time again. Well, it turns out that those people are getting sick and tired of dodging those hurricanes, floods, tornadoes, and wildfires. There's a new phenomenon called climate migration. Who knew, right? People are moving to new areas that are less prone to those extreme weather events. Just as thousands of people left New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina and never came back, or left Houston after Hurricane Harvey and never came back, some people are moving even before their possessions can be wiped out by the next storm or flood or wildfire. Imagine a lot of those people in California are not going to go back, right? Where are they going? Guess where? It turns out a lot of them are going to the Midwest, including to Michigan. Who knew? At least that's what USA Today and a whole bunch of studies are saying. Why are they going to Michigan? Why are they going to the Midwest? Well, today we're going to find out from a woman in the C-suite of the state of Michigan. So put on your earbuds, turn up the volume, grab a pen and pad or tablet to take notes, and let's find out where all these people are going and why they're going to Michigan. Welcome to Electric Ladies Podcast. We share stories, insights, tips, and advice from remarkably innovative women working on the front lines of corporate responsibility, energy, sustainability, and climate-related issues. I'm your host, Joan Michelson. We talk about innovation, leadership, technologies, and careers, always bringing a new perspective. Find us anywhere you like to listen to podcasts on our website, electricladiespodcast.com, and through my Forbes articles as well. And please pass it on to your friends and leave us a 5-star review if you're so inclined. It helps other people find us. This episode is brought to you by Competent Boards, a comprehensive training program for board members and aspiring board members. Full disclosure, I am faculty and I have the Sustainability and ESG designation certification myself. It gives you the skills, strategic perspective, and importantly, confidence that you need for today's boardrooms, especially around the kinds of issues we talk about on Electric Ladies Podcast. It's great networking too, by the way. Check it out at competentboards.com. One more quick thing before we get started. If you are at an inflection point yourself in all of this insanity swirling around us, with your career, with your ESG work, whatever, please reach out to me. In all of this chaos, there is a lot of opportunity too, and we don't want you to be flailing. You know how to find me on LinkedIn at Joan Michelson. Let me know you're a listener and what you're wrestling with. We can help you no matter what industry you're in. So get this. The Center for Neighborhood Technology found in a new study that some of the safest areas in the U.S. are in, drumroll please, Western Michigan. I mean, come on, people are used to having snow in Michigan and escaping Michigan, right? So are the Appalachian Mountains, Utah, New Mexico, Nevada, and Idaho. And how many people are we talking about? A Tulane University study found that estimates that 50 million Americans could eventually relocate, including to the upper Midwest, to escape severe climate events. That, people, is insane. It's also predicted that because U.S. coastal sea level areas are expected to rise by as much as a foot, 12 inches, picture that. By 2050, they might pack up and move sooner rather than later. Why Michigan? Oh, I'm used to people telling me they're going to escape the snow in Michigan. Let's find out. I'd like you to meet Hilary, the Chief Growth Officer of the state of Michigan. She's the first person in that role, too, by the way. She's overseeing the growth of Michigan's population, economy, and reputation as, quote, the best place to live, work, raise a family, and start a business, unquote. Before joining the state government, Hilary was national director at the Roosevelt Network, driving social change with young people nationwide. And by the way, they eventually were awarded a MacArthur grant, which is very cool, for creative and effective institution. I didn't know there was that kind of an award. She's also served as vice president of the Roosevelt Institute and president and chief strategy officer at Nation Builder, which combines software and spreading democracy. Hilary is a born and bred Michigander. She earned her bachelor's degree from the University of Michigan's Honors College, her master's in public policy at the Ford School, and studied political behavior at Princeton. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Hilary Doe to Electric Ladies podcast. Welcome, Hilary. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, good. We're excited to have you. So what the heck does a chief growth officer do in the state of Michigan? What does that mean in practice? What's your day like?
Yes, absolutely. And totally fair that folks might not know what that means because Michigan is, the first state in the nation to name a chief growth officer. So not only am I the, first in the role there, but we're the first state to come up with this role. And the task at hand really is to reverse some of our population trends. That's what this was all sparked by. Michigan has historically been one of about 34% of states that had been seeing population stagnation for, some time. So we're very much not alone in that. About a third of the country had, struggled with population stagnation. But specifically, we wanted to be the first and the first movers in thinking comprehensively about how to make sure that we change that in the future. So in my office, we've really tried to take that on holistically. We're thinking about policy solutions, things that we can change from a policy perspective that make the product that is our place to call home, a better and better place for folks, especially, for young talent, for example. So our talent's deciding to stay or folks are coming to join us from across the country. But we're also, telling our story, making sure that folks know what we have on offer here in Michigan, like busting some myths about the state. You mentioned snow, for example, which we do have, but we also have a lot of fun in the snow and letting folks know things that, they might not have known about, like our really fast growing innovation ecosystems and, how creative and innovative this place has always been, which is, why I chose to come back. I'm what they call a boomerang here in Michigan. Grew up here, left the state for, about a decade and lived all over, and then made a really intentional choice to be here to build my future. And we're seeing, as you were naming in the introduction, more and more folks making that choice.
Yeah, when I was in Detroit in March, I guess it was, or last March, I went to the new innovation center that I think Ford has been underwriting. And it was interesting. I mean, obviously there was a bunch in the auto sector, but there were some other really creative sectors there too. So, and we all know that the auto sector is even founded in Michigan, and that beautiful mural in the Detroit Institute of the Arts with the laborers working the new, I think from the days of the founding of the Ford Motor Company. But what other industries are strong in Michigan? Tell us a little bit about the economy that you're growing there.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that innovation center. It's rooted in Michigan Central, which is this really beautiful train station here in Detroit that was also the welcome for more immigrant communities to our state than through anywhere else except Ellis Island, I think, if I remember correctly. So we're have a really rich history here of folks choosing to come to our place in order to build their futures. And I'm actually sitting in that innovation center right now. So I'm across the street in New Lab where we're incubating right now. The organization here that you said Ford's involved in and a bunch of others there's 120 startups, I believe, if not a few more than that now, who are all building their companies here. And it's a really diverse group of different startups so in tech. We actually, have the second fastest growing startup ecosystem in the country now, which we're really proud of, and working hard to ensure that, we've wrapped arms around those folks and they can start their companies here and also scale them here in Michigan. But in terms of industries, one that is, I think, really relevant to maybe the listeners here that always surprises folks and I've been trying to share the story about is clean energy. So, Michigan, I always say we're really proud of our automotive history. We've changed the way the world moves, but it's always been about innovation and not just, cars, right? And in the same way, Michiganders have always been really intentional stewards, I think, and take seriously our stewardship of natural resources. We're surrounded by 20% of the world's fresh water. And so I think it comes pretty naturally to our place that We're thinking about clean energy and our role in fighting the climate crisis. And so over the last handful of years, the state has invested tremendously in the growth of the clean energy job sector. The Department of Energy has said that Michigan has the fastest growing clean energy job sector in America. It's actually growing at 2 times the rate of U.S. employment. We have, 120,000 plus clean energy jobs now in the state, and actually had more IRA backed clean energy projects than anywhere else in the country. So, lots of action in that space, and a really important component now of, our commitment, of course, to that cause, but also of our economy.
Yeah, and I do want to ask you about that, but a couple quick things first.
Yeah.
You said there are 120 startups in that building. That is the building
Yeah.
I was talking about, by the way.
Yeah.
That's you're in it at the moment. That's pretty trippy. But what kinds of startups are there? You mentioned
Yeah.
tech. I think there was one that, I mean, there were a bunch that I saw there.
Yeah.
When I literally just wandered around and ended up,
Sure.
chatting with people. So
Yeah,
tell us some of the startups that are there.
Yeah, truly, it's really, really diverse. There's all kinds of folks, but to call a few out that are just really wonderful examples. One's Just Air, run by a gentleman called Darren Riley, who's building solutions for, air quality control so that you can kind of assess, for example, whether you're the parent of a child with asthma or whether you're, local government and you want to let your, community know about the air quality. He's building solutions for that, these monitors that are really innovative. We have folks here that are building mobility solutions like semi-trikes for cities that they can, better move goods and services around. We have a company here that's actually doing biotech and plant listening because plants communicate with one another, and they are leveraging that technology and pulling it to its extremes in really innovative ways that I think really lead the field. So it's very, very diverse. We also have a whole outlet of femology here, which are all female founders, as well as the largest Black and Brown community of founders. I'd say the preeminent Black and Brown tech ecosystem in the country. On a given Saturday, you can see 700 plus founders gathered here as part of that Black Tech Saturdays ecosystem. And, folks from across the country are coming to, see and be part of that supportive community. So diverse from an industry perspective and a mission perspective, but also, a really diverse group of founders as well from their, backgrounds and experiences.
Yeah, and I even saw you have a couple of restaurants in there too, which were
Sure, all kinds of
really
things. Yep.
important for you. Got to have it for those startups, right?
Yeah.
For these people working 24/7. One of the things that I liked about that space, just as a quick heads up, is the road out front that, which is why I went there in the first place, because I'm an EV fanatic,
Yeah.
having worked in them at Chrysler. And I love that there's literally a road where you can charge your car just by driving over it. You don't stop and whatever. You just, and the discs that are there and things. I just thought that was so cool. Are you guys expanding that road? I mean, is it going to be elsewhere? Or is it just on that road?
Yeah, there's a bunch of, this place is a hub for all kinds of kind of pilots with the hope that, those technologies get to be expanded. So yeah, right now there's the first piece of self-charging road exists here. And I believe there are plans for expansion. Also, we have drone testing happening right above as well. And there's a lot of that happening across the state because again, we have so much fresh water that you can do drone testing over the lakes, for example, which are really unique conditions. So there's sort of a drone highway over where I am right now. And we also have something called Cavenue, which is a connected automated vehicle lane for automated vehicle testing. So all kinds of really kind of innovative pilots happening in the area. It is a really stimulating, exciting, innovative environment to be a part of. Whenever I leave to go grab lunch, there's inevitably a robot driving around doing something. So, it's a wonderful place in my position, right, where I'm, thinking about how we retain talent and attract folks and share our story to really work because it's such an enriching, community to be part of.
Well, I was thinking, yeah, it's very stimulating, right? It sort of makes you think out of the box just by physically sitting there. One of the things when we spoke in preparation for this interview before, you mentioned that there was a recent study of, business leaders where in effect, all of them really said that climate change was having an impact on their business. That's kind of astonishing. Tell us about that study and what you asked and what you found.
Yeah, absolutely. As I'm going into that, the group I should have mentioned perhaps more in here are a number of startups that are working on solutions to, fight the climate crisis, including an electric vehicle RV and all kinds of other things. So I mention that because the reason we did that survey is, in addition to, leading in clean energy, we're also obviously, because of our auto history, a leader in electric vehicle manufacturing, and design and innovation of all kinds of climate startups across the state. So from that perspective, we really wanted to get a sense from, business leaders across the country, how they were thinking about climate, what the impact had been on them already, and, what they were planning to do about it, what kind of actions they were taking, what kind of resources were really important to them, so we could do a good job on stateside, supporting organizations and companies that were here. And what we found were that in this, nationwide survey of business leaders, 100% of folks, which, you never see 100% of respondents agree on anything, said that they had already been affected, their businesses in some way, by climate, whether that was, extreme weather, business disruptions, outages, and that 75% of them actually identified, even considering relocation as a result of some of those, extreme weather events or business disruptions or utility price increases. There were all kinds of ways in which folks identified the impact of climate. But I did think it was so striking that, there was 100%, complete agreement that it was a challenge and something that folks had to tackle.
Yeah, 100% of people don't agree on what time it is or whether
Right.
whether it's snowing or sunny outside. That's
Sure.
kind of astonishing.
Right.
So that's curious to me. And I didn't realize it was a nationwide study. What kinds of industries did you study? I mean, how did you break it down?
Yeah. It was, as I understand it, like a very broad, cross section of industries, and, trying to get at folks who are running capital intensive businesses, of course, because that they're particularly affected by some of these events. And we were interested in what their responses would be. But also folks who, are running, more sort of small scale businesses or, maybe more like tech-focused businesses where your major capital is in, employees, for example. So I think it was a pretty diverse cross-section. And that's why the way in which they experienced being affected were quite different, right? In some cases, it might have been as simple as utility costs increasing for their data center, whereas in another case, it was, complete business disruption of their supply chain. But sort of irrespective of their way in, there was broad recognition, that it was a problem, they needed to do something about it. And as folks were looking for, what they might do, the kinds of things that seemed to be on the table, are quite costly, right? For folks to go so far as to have 3/4 of them consider actually moving, that's really dramatic, actually, right? So it must be the case that those impacts are marked and and challenging.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, people left after Hurricane Harvey in Houston and never went back. I mean, it's like, the hell with this, right? But talk a little bit about, have you done any diving into the people that are coming to Michigan and to escape the climate, somewhere else? Or what kinds of, are they bringing businesses? Are they working for the auto industry? I mean, what kind of work are those people doing that are coming in?
Yeah, it's really diverse. So, when we started this work, our hope was to, be retention first, make sure we're, building a place that, our young talent want to choose to stay, and then also be a beacon to folks across the country to come and join us. I've been interested in making sure that I tell a Michigan story about being, a leader in the fight against the climate crisis from the beginning, because I think it's really important that young talent here in our state and across the country know that if they want to do purpose-driven work, there's no better place to do it. I often say, if you have a degree in finance, I get why you might want to go to Wall Street. If you want to do purpose-driven work in this area, there's really no better place to be. So that's always been an important part of our work. But also from the beginning, folks have been flagging for us that, folks consider Michigan a climate haven. That will be relevant, when we think about our population projections. It's relevant to our policy, decisions, because we should be thinking about housing and making investments there, not only to make sure we have available opportunities for existing Michiganders, but also for future Michiganders, right? So from the beginning, that's really been one of the pieces of the conversation. From my perspective, I always like to say that there is no place that's truly a climate haven, nowhere that will be unaffected. Everywhere is going to be affected in some way. And I think that's really important for us to name so we take appropriate action. All of us need to do what's required to make the infrastructure investments, for the additional water and rain we'll see, and, all the things that we have to do to get ahead of it. But it is the case that Michigan's ranked number one of all states in climate resilience. So, relatively less affected than anywhere else, in part because of where we're situated in the country geographically, and also in part, frankly, because of all that fresh water that I was mentioning previously. Having access to all that fresh water and natural resource is a huge help in these moments. And so it's true that we see folks move, to the state. And sometimes that's their reason. It makes sense for business, right? Because if you do have a capital intensive business, you don't want it to blow away. So I understand why those folks would choose, a climate haven. But we're also seeing folks who are more highly mobile as be some of those first movers, individual residents. So for example, remote workers can choose to work anywhere, right? So they might be some of the first that a state would see, choice. They make a choice like this that was informed perhaps by climate. And we saw just that during, and after the pandemic, where remote work became more popular. The Traverse City area, which is in sort of the northern lower peninsula, it's incredibly beautiful. For folks that don't know, it's Michigan's wine region. So we grow lots of grapes and wine there, make wine there. And we saw a big boom per capita, some of the largest growth in the whole state of remote workers choosing that area, in part because, of its climate resilience. You also see some of that happening in the Upper Peninsula and, folks buying land and things like that as a result of climate migration. So that was some of the first, I think, movement we saw. And now it's bearing out as well in data. I'll just mention this quickly, but there was a University of Virginia study that came out recently, and I just think it's worth folks reading. It's so interesting, at least to folks who like data like myself. And it shows, which states have the fastest acceleration in their young adult population. And Michigan is in the top 5. Michigan's young adult population was accelerating faster than 45 other states. That was not true.
What do you mean by accelerating? What do you mean by accelerating?
So what I mean is the shape of the curve of our growth, has changed.
So the number of them so you're getting more and more of them in the state.
It's growing faster. Yeah, relatively. So it's not that we have in raw numbers necessarily gotten to the place, right, where there are more young people here than in Texas, but that rate of growth is accelerating here faster than, almost anywhere else in the country. And that was not where we were, in the 2010s. That isn't where we were necessarily when I took this job. And I think it's informed by a lot of things, but that remote work boom in part is very clearly, the result of climate migration. And our clean energy boom drove some more of it, which is in part informed by our climate forward positioning, right? So in a lot of ways, I think that growth is driven by some of what we're talking about right now.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. By the way, Secretary Buttigieg and Cheston moved to Traverse City too.
Yeah.
I recall. Yeah, they're lovely.
So if anyone wants to be their neighbor, come to Michigan.
Yeah, that's right. So I ended up sitting next to Cheston's mom at an event. I didn't know it until she introduced herself. It was really fun. She's great. You mentioned the money from the Inflation Reduction Act. I wanted to kind of explore that for a second, because that is creating new jobs and that is bringing money in, right? And talent. So talk about, you guys went after that quickly, which turned out to be a godsend, right? So talk about what incentives, what funding. I understand it was $28 billion over about 70 projects. And you mentioned
Right.
yourself a minute ago that I think it was about 20,000 new jobs that it created. But tell us about the funding, about the projects, about the jobs, and what impact that's on, because I would also imagine, you talked about climate resilience, that some of that was making the state more resilient too, right?
Yeah.
So expand on that
Yeah.
a little bit for us.
Yeah, definitely. So that's absolutely right that it was, 28 billion in additional investment, which of course is dramatic for any community, but makes a big difference here in Michigan too. And 20,000 plus additional jobs that contributed to that. I think about 120,000, clean energy jobs in the state now. And it includes all kinds of things and all kinds of projects. But as an example, everything from, solar panel manufacturing, wind turbine manufacturing, EV investments. So those kinds of jobs, as well as, to your point, some community investments to ensure continued resilience. We did lots of infrastructure investments over the last handful of years to make sure our communities are in the best possible place they can be. And we complemented some of that federal investment with workforce investment to ensure Michiganders are, getting access to those kinds of roles, some of which didn't even exist, previously. So wanting to make sure that, Michigan communities could benefit from learning to be solar installers, right? And get access to some of those new economic income streams. So that was important. And part of this is driven by, as well, and part of our sort of early adoption, I guess, is driven by Michigan's pretty ambitious climate policy that we, had pursued previously. So the governor had led the charge on passing the My Healthy Climate Plan, which committed Michigan to economy-wide, net neutrality, carbon neutrality rather, by 2050. And, with that kind of a commitment, it really drives demand, of course, and was a real call to action. Also, I think a signal to folks across the country that we were serious. It's one of the most ambitious climate plans in the country. We started requiring across government, all our buildings were, powered by clean energy, things like that. So really building markets for getting a lot of that new energy online. And one of the other findings from that study I just mentioned from University of Virginia, in addition to those remote workers, is that another pocket of that growth was in the broader Metro Detroit area, specifically in some manufacturing roles. I think, inevitably connected to, some of the solar and wind turbine and, manufacturing, which, I think is directly related to pulling down some of that federal investment.
Right, sure. And you can't outsource solar installation, right? It's got to be, you can't do that remotely, right? It's interesting. One of the things that struck me, I want to ask you a couple things and then get into some career advice. But one of the things, since you bring up this part, that I just did a story that New York State, and this blows my mind. I just interviewed Doreen Harris, who runs NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. She's fabulous. And she said, and I saw some other research actually, that the best way to describe this is to say the huge investment that the New York State made in clean energy has ended up making them somewhat insulated from the tariff fiasco.
Interesting.
I guess, they don't need the extra, they're not dependent upon, right, that whole, all the pieces that are affected by the tariffs, which is really, really interesting. I mean, I would imagine that some of it they would be, I mean, you've got, the minerals and you've got other pieces. But what impact which makes me ask you, what impact have the tariffs had on Michigan's economy and sectors so far? I saw that Governor Whitmer today, and the day we're recording this, came out and talked a little bit about that. But talk about the impact so far. I mean, I know it's super early and everything's just kind of clicking in, but what are you finding so far?
Yeah. I mean, I think, anyone that claims to know exactly what will happen, isn't telling the truth. Like we all are kind of, waiting to see, and are really committed to ensuring, Michiganders, have affordable prices and affordable quality of life. I mean, part of the thing we talk about a lot here is cost of living and making sure that we maintain a nice little cost of living for our residents. And so I think that's the commitment, right? So this seems to be a threat to that, right? Like we hope that we have to wait to see how it plays out. We have to wait to see how the negotiations play out. But beyond that, we're in a bit of a, wait and see kind of place. However, I think in moments like this, you can control the controllables. And to your point about, that sort of analysis in New York State, I think there are industries that are more resilient, right, than others. For example, utility industries are more resilient, right? So having a more diversified economy with more jobs that are in those utility industries is great, because they tend to be nice and steady places to be. Similarly, we've actually had a lot of growth and diversification in areas like aerospace and defense and things like that, where you see continued and consistent investment. So, in those ways, our continued kind of diversification and some of this really intentional investment that we were able to pull down and make, I think does position us to, be in a better place in any economic condition, which is really good and important. And similarly, we see that startups and small businesses are never more important, to local economies than, when there's a little bit of uncertainty, right? And so some of investments that have been made there, like we were alluding to previously, I think will be really important over the next few years, and we're really happy we made them.
I bet. Have any of the funds that you were allocated through the Inflation Reduction Act been canceled or pulled back so far?
Not to my knowledge. I'm not as close to that as folks who are in the relevant departments, but I think that the truth of the matter is we were lucky to be on top of it and pull down and deploy funding as quickly as we can for a lot of reasons, but most importantly, of course, because you want to get that investment into communities as quickly as possible and allow them to benefit from it as quickly as possible. So I think we're a little ahead of the 8 ball in that regard, but it's possible folks who are a little closer to it than I are tracking other things. But yeah, I think we do have a little bit of an advantage there, having moved quickly.
Yeah, I bet you do. So I want to ask you one other thing and then get some career advice from you. Your experience in Michigan, I mean, you're not the only state that has faced an exodus of talent, right? I lived, as I think in North Dakota for a couple of years. They had faced a lot of the similar problems that Michigan has, only much more so because their weather is much more severe. So how are you sharing some of the lessons that you have gleaned both from, you just talked about some tangible results already showing up, right? And so how are you sharing some of the lessons from growing a clean energy economy, pivoting your economy, seeking talent through, in part, these climate and clean energy sectors? Because I would imagine that I don't care what their economy is or what their political persuasion is. I would think that they would at least benefit from some piece of that. Yeah. So is that something that Governor Whitmer shares through the Governors Association? I know there's the National Association of Mayors. How is that? How are the lessons that from your experience being able to be proliferated across the country through the other states?
Yeah. I think that's such a good question, because I think that's one area that we can always do better, and not just in this role or this task or this topic. To your point about career advice, I think, we can always do better trying to share these lessons learned, you know what I mean? And I think sometimes, you get through the work and then just move on to the next thing, and it's so important to make sure we're doing our best to, share out. So that definitely has been a commitment of our office, especially because we're doing something a little bit unique,
very unique.
Yeah, a little bit of a first mover. So we want to do our best to kind of share some of that. For example, we've met with another state about some of our storytelling work who expressed interest in that. One of the challenges challenges to this is, that I don't necessarily have a direct counterpart. Like there is a governors association. So I know that our governor and, our state officials who are in those rooms are very active participants. But for me, I don't have as much of a direct counterpart. So what we've tried to do is be really present in the right rooms. So, you'll see us all over the place. We were at MTech, which is a climate conference last year in partnership with MIT about a big report we did together, trying to share those learnings, with other states and organizations to whom it'd be relevant. We'll be, in the summer elsewhere and, kind of doing our best to be on the road, sharing what we've learned. With sincere hope that when we do, folks who are listening will also circle back, with what they're seeing and what, they're finding on the ground, because I'm conscious, of course, that we can learn a lot from that too. And that sense of like listening and feedback has been really the DNA of this whole effort. From the second that I said yes to this role, we've been in it in communities across Michigan. We've heard now from about 25,000 Michiganders, asking them what they love about our state and what's between them and building their future here. And that public feedback has informed our whole policy agenda. So I'm really, committed to making sure that we're, paying that forward and hoping that when we're in those rooms, folks will do the same.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I've had some coaching clients up there and consultant clients up there. I interviewed also Michelle Muller of the Michigan DOT, who's doing some great stuff up there too. But I would think, it's funny. I mean, a lot of states or a lot of cities didn't have a chief resilience officer, and now they do, right? I interviewed Nicole Farini, who was like one of the first ones in San Antonio, I think, or El Paso. And then now there's a whole bunch of places that have, chief resilience officers. And so you never know, you might be starting a trend, Hilary.
Maybe we'll start a trend. Exactly. I mean, one version of this that is starting in a lot of places are kind of talent retention and attraction programs. So we're seeing those crop up everywhere. So yeah, maybe counterparts will follow. And I think a relevant, quick plug is that today we actually launched a program called Make My Home that offers exactly that. So, if folks are thinking about, working in climate or, a new place to call home or some fresh water, the program offers, opportunities for folks to consider different communities and access down payments or student loan forgiveness or different kinds of, programs here in the state when they're thinking about a new place to call home. But I only mention it because truly that's happening in communities really across the country, which has been an interesting phenomena. That wasn't true, 5 or even 10 or 5 years ago, right? It's really been quite recent. And those programs have taken off, which I think speaks to the quote unquote talent war and the extent to which, it's so critical that we retain and attract talent.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, we have to do what we can with where we are and what we have, right?
Yes.
What we can control the controllable, I think you said.
Yep.
So before I let you get back to your life and saving the economy and the people of Michigan, I like to give career advice to mid-career women. So think about women who have 10, maybe 15 years of experience. They have an education. They know what they're good at. They want to excel. They want to make money. They want to advance, and they want to make a difference. You talked about purpose earlier. So, and they don't feel like it should be a trade-off, right? So what advice do you have for them?
Yeah. I struggle with this advice a little bit because I'm really aware that, there's some privilege, right? And in the ability to do some of these things, and I always like to start there because, in different moments of my life, I wouldn't have been able to take this advice. In different moments of my life, I had a little baby at home or, a brand new whatever mortgage or rent or what have you. But I do know so many folks who at that stage in their career start to really experience frustration because they have built such a wealth of expertise and they do have so much to offer, but they might feel just stuck. Like it's not being recognized or they're struggling to advance and take the next step or what have you in the context that they're currently in. And, I don't mean to suggest that it's just women that are in that situation at all, but I have noticed that a lot of women really, who I've talked to are stuck, right? And feel that way. And in my experience, when I've been able to jump off that ladder that I'm stuck on and, pursue something, a different context, a different platform or container or what have you that lets me get unstuck, that's really, really worked out for me. I mean, a version of this is, you have been, consulting forever and it's just, you can't get where you need to go. And then you start your own thing, right? And it feels really scary for a second, but then you get, further by jumping off the ladder than you could have by staying on it. It's risky, which is why I hesitate to share the advice. But I think also sometimes it just unlocks so much passion in an individual that to do exactly what you're meant to do and share all your gifts and not feel, stuck, that you can be, tremendously sort of more inspired and folks can see that on you and it, be more successful than maybe you could have been in the other context. So, yeah, I'm curious if other folks share something similar, but I just think that stuck place doesn't serve anybody. And, you have a lot to offer the world.
So are you saying that they should try to take a risk and hang their own shingle, or what's the risk that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it looks different for different folks. I mean, I have an entrepreneurial streak, so it's looked like that for me in the past, but sometimes I think it can be, looking for a new role, instead of, feeling like you've got to make it in the context that you're in. I guess it's a little bit of what's the fallacy there? It's escaping me from my econ classes. Where you've sort of spent a lot of time in one container and you feel like, I've already invested a lot here. I've got to make it here, And I think, where women are less inclined, maybe sometimes in my experience, my friends or what have you, to just be willing to jump, when you feel stuck. And there's sometimes so much light at the end of that rainbow. If you're kind of, willing to try something strange or weird or take a job no one's ever had before, or, start the thing that, is exactly what you want to do, or be willing to switch an employer or what have you. So, if you have the opportunity to, get in a new context, it can be worth it when you're feeling that way.
Yeah, well, that's how I got into this space, because I was offered an opportunity by Chrysler to move to Fargo, North Dakota, and head up communications and co-head the sales and marketing of the electric car division of Chrysler. So, I mean, my friends thought I had swallowed acid when I told them that I was moving from DC to North Dakota. They were like,
Sure.
Excuse me?
Sure.
But it changed my life, because
Sure.
I've been in this space ever since, right? And they're wonderful people, etc. I did spend a bunch of time in Michigan with Chrysler, I wasn't based there, but I did spend a lot of time there, obviously.
Sure. I did the same thing. I was in Chicago doing something I didn't love and just quit and decided to work for a nonprofit and raise my salary and everyone else's. I think my parents thought I was a complete wild thing, but it worked out. It was arguably the best thing I could have done. It can be really hard in those moments to see and recognize, though, that's the jump you should take. And I just think like listening to when you're, really feeling stuck can be important.
Well, and listening to yourself, right? And listening to the people who say that's too risky. I mean, they're not you, right? They just,
Right.
I mean, I've lived in 8 states and I've had people say to me, how do you do that? And I said, well, you put your stuff in a suitcase and you get on an airplane, and they're like, well, and these are women who are very successful, who,
Totally.
maybe have a lot of money or have done whatever. I'm like, you have, more of a cushion than I did when I went, why would it be scary for you?
Sure.
But people are often afraid to take a risk. So I love what you're saying is, you don't learn less. You're always going to learn something from it. The worst that happens is you hate it and you leave,
and you leave. Yeah.
Else, right?
You only have so many.
But you have to give yourself, you have to give the parts of yourself a voice, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, any final thoughts before I let you get back to your life?
No, I mean, I think I appreciate the time to get the chance to chat. I think if folks want to reach out, I'm always happy to connect. Folks can find me on LinkedIn. That's usually the best way to connect these days. But also you can follow our work at Let's Grow Michigan on all, the usual social channels, and kind of see what we're up to and reach out that way as well. But appreciate the opportunity to chat. It's there's a lot going on these days, and it's great to, be connected to folks who are trying to do great things. So I appreciate you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Hilary. Hilary Doe, Chief Growth Officer of the state of Michigan. Thank you for joining us. I wish I could say I would see you in Dallas, but unfortunately I won't, at our Earth Day Women's Summit, but next year, maybe next year.
Yes, let's do it.
Let's do it. So how are you considering relocating to escape extreme climate events where you are now? Or do you know anybody who is? Post it to us on Twitter and Threads at Joan Michelson. Send us any questions there as well. You may win a complimentary 30-minute coaching session with me. I've met some fabulous people that way. And please come to our Women's Summit I mentioned briefly on April 22nd in Dallas, or go to electricladiespodcast.com to find out more and to subscribe to our mailing list and stay abreast of